probably wondering, well, then what are you looking for? And I know one-on-one we can kind of get into this a little bit more, so I'll do my best to kind of give you the overview, and then Beth will talk with you about financial aid, and then we'll leave it some time for Q&A. So one, I want to talk to you about our approach to looking at applications. I'd like to talk to you about the application requirements themselves. And then, because I know we can kind of never fully satisfy, you know, your sometimes anxiety, let's be honest, we've all been there when we have to apply for something, it can be anxiety provoking. What if she or he or they didn't answer everything? What next? So I do want to talk to you about some of the resources. But let's just get the real basics out of the way. So deadlines are really important. Here at Harvard Divinity School, we don't have flexible deadlines. They're really firm deadlines. So this year for the application, it's going to be Tuesday, January 16th, 2018 at 5 p.m. And let me advance my slide. I'm probably still on the first one. Let me get it. Okay, there we go. And so that's important. 5 p.m. is important as well. And you can apply to the following programs. You'll pick one. You can apply to the MDiv, the Masters of Divinity, the MTS, which is the Masters of Theological Studies. We have a THM, Master of Theology program, which does require that you already have an MDiv or the equivalent, so keep that in mind. We also have a special student program, which is a non-degree program, and we have the Whole Family Scholars program, and that's also a non-degree program. All of those adhere to that same deadline. Once you've applied and committee has reviewed your application, you'll be getting a decision from us approximately mid-March of that year. And for those of you who are applying to the PhD program, because we do have some people watching remotely, so even if you're not in the room right now, even people watching remotely, for the religion program at Harvard, that deadline is December 15th, so a different deadline. They have their own admissions website. You would go to the Graduate School of Arts and Science and look for PhD in religion. Okay, so let's talk about what the committee is looking at, and I'll get into what are the elements of the application in just a moment. First of all, we're trying to build a class that has a range of experiences, backgrounds, and interests. And so that's why we're not looking for like a typical student. You also, as we now know, talking with you here today and from our current students and alumni, you have a variety of career aspirations as well. So we can't use a formula, and that makes the application pool very unique and very diverse. We also are looking at your application materials in the same manner. And so we're looking at, sorry, I'm going to skip ahead a little bit to get into the elements. We're looking at a number of factors. I don't have the slide up right this second, so I'm going to skip ahead so we can see that. Obviously, you're going to provide some information about yourself on the online application. That's one piece of the information. But another really important part is your academic transcripts. And so we actually want to see all of your coursework. So even if you took a course a long time ago at a community college, or you did some study abroad, or you took a language class internationally, whatever it might be, we want to see complete coursework. We do allow you to submit unofficial transcripts, at least at the application process. If you're admitted, you would then have to provide official transcripts. We also have a fee, an application fee of $75. Let's see, I'm going to get my page that's the exact same, so don't keep looking behind me. I actually have this memorized, but I want to be really intentional and not say, oops, I forgot to tell you that one thing. And the pièce de résistance that everyone asks us about, which is a statement of purpose. And I do want to spend a little bit of time on that in just a moment. That is a 1,000-word statement. And we also have an additional essay that is 500 words for the MDiv and MTS applicants only. We also require 3 letters of recommendation, and if you're applying to the MTS program, typically a lot of the students, particularly if you're a current student, you might want to provide faculty members, at least 2. Sometimes a third might be an internship experience you've had or some professional experience. If you're applying to the Master's of Divinity program, again, you might want to provide at least one faculty letter or two if you're a current student, and your third letter may be something related to your actual aspirations in the field of ministry. So if you're looking for ordained ministry and you have active membership in a faith-based community or church or synagogue or mosque or other faith setting, you could get a letter from that person. Or if you're involved in social justice movements or other types of work, you could provide a letter from that type of experience. I should also mention our application season is open. I should have said that. So you can actually start your online application, not now, because we want you to pay attention to what we're saying here right this second. But as soon as we're done, we'll allow you to get started. And you can start it, and we can't see what you're doing. So it's your, it's your private application. You can continue to work on it until you submit it. Within the application itself, there are a number of instructions, and we really encourage you to pay close attention to those, and please contact our office if you have any questions about that. So let's talk about two things. One, let's talk about your resume or CV. You'll see that that's also a requirement. The resume or CV is really important. We often look at that for additional information. So you're going to tell us on your application itself, places you've worked, volunteer experiences, but you can even, kind of develop that further in your resume. I want you to think of your application as if you were interviewing with us. What are the elements of your application that tells the story? So don't just think of your transcripts or your standardized tests, your GRE, which we do require, or if English is not your first language or you didn't study at a school in which English is the full instruction. I should have said that, we also require the IELTS or the TOEFL. But don't just think about those elements, your standardized tests and your transcript. Those are incredibly important as a part of the application process, but you have a lot of say-so in how you tell your own story. So one way is your statement, and let's just talk for a minute about that. So some of the things you can discuss in your statement is obviously your personal background, but don't make it too personal in the sense that you shouldn't spend the 2 or 3 pages really telling us your life story and then by the end wrap it up and say, so therefore, I'm interested in Harvard Divinity School. Really, you're missing out on the opportunity to not only tell us about your personal background, but you can tell us about your objective. Why are you interested in Harvard Divinity School? And it should be far greater than the reputation of Harvard. You should, especially after coming here today and visiting all the other people you've met and the faculty and others in our community, something here, we're assuming if you're applying, has really resonated with you, and we'd love to hear more about that. Where do you see this education taking you? What are you on the path to do in your life? Some of you are already on that path. Maybe this is going to further you on that journey. Some of you are starting out in a new direction. Tell us a little bit about that and how you think being in this place with whatever resources, faculty, programs, and such you feel will be useful in that. And why is this a good fit for you if you feel it is? You might be looking at other programs. We often have students that are applying to other divinity schools or seminaries or theology programs, and I'm assuming those each bring something different for you, but focus on us, obviously. But tell us why you think this is a good fit for you potentially. And what not only will you get from us, but what do you feel like you might contribute to this community? Now that we've established we're a pluralistic, diverse community, that each person here is unique and contributes something special, imagine yourself here. What do you think you might be contributing? That's the basis of a really strong statement. And it's also an opportunity for you to demonstrate your writing skills. We don't have an actual research paper or other writing sample you can submit. So really spend some time on the statement. So I'll talk to you a little bit about the letters of recommendation. Again, don't try to impress us with the most famous person at your school or the name of the person that's recommending you. Really try to find a faculty member, if we want to start there, who knows you, at least in the past, if you were a graduate, or currently knows you or knew you fairly well, even if it was just one class. Maybe it was a significant experience you had with that faculty member. And it doesn't mean you had to be perfect in the class. Maybe you started out, new to the study of religion, but by the end you were doing some really interesting work. So those are the kind of letters that are often the best. What if you've been out of school for a while and you can't get any letters from faculty? We do have mid-career applicants, and typically they're finding people who can write about them from a more academic perspective, meaning they may not know how you were in the classroom, but maybe they're familiar with how you think, how you analyze problems, how you communicate. Maybe you've written a grant. Maybe you did some writing that they're familiar with. Maybe you blog. So try to find something other than they're a nice person and we like them at Staples or wherever you work. Trying to be funny like Beth. You'll see in a minute. She's very, very funny. No pressure, Beth. Right. I'm just throwing in a little humor here and there. Applying can be a very serious business. We don't want to make it too serious for you. So that would be your statement. Now, how do you go about doing this? Briefly, I just want to say, talk to the people who are recommending you. Don't just ask for the letter. Help them out a little bit. Maybe tell them why you're doing this. Give them maybe your resume or something that helps them to understand how they might want to think about those letters on your behalf. Let's spend a minute just on the GRE. That's the notorious GRE in the sense that, I don't know anyone yet who loves taking standardized tests. First of all, some of you don't have a lot of time to prepare because you're applying right now. But even if you have a day or two, I hope that you have more than that, but whatever you have, you need to prepare. Don't just suddenly say, okay, I'm diving in, let's hope it goes well. Familiarize yourself, maybe take a sample test. If you have more than a day or two, really try to just mostly familiarize yourself with the test. It is not innately testing your intelligence. It's testing to some degree how familiar you are with the test itself. The other thing you should know is that it is not the primary thing that we look at in the application. It is one piece of information. We mostly focus on the verbal and writing scores. We know a lot of people tell us they don't do so well in math, so don't worry about that. If you're good in math, that's great, and we'll see that. But again, don't think of it as the primary focus, but do prepare. And then, again, if you don't have English as a first language and you did not go to a school where English was the sole instruction, you should also take the TOEFL or the IELTS. Those tests, GRE and the two language tests, have to also be submitted by January 16th. So make sure you give yourself plenty of time to prepare for those. What you should know, as soon as you submit everything, that's when we start reviewing applications. So we don't review them as they come in. Just one little thing to know. So how do you go about, sorry, I'm not good at the whole advancing thing. I just get to talking and I forget I haven't advanced. How do you go about getting resources after today? There's a lot of ways to do that. Our staff are listed up there. We're a small staff, but we're available to speak with you either by phone or email. We also have student volunteers that help us. You can reach out to them through the ask_students email. And then tonight or this afternoon later, we will have open office hours at 4 o'clock back at Divinity Hall. But we're available literally year-round, except for the weekends, but we're available year-round to be available to you to further the conversation if you still have questions. And then I'll be available here today to answer questions after this session. So I'll turn it over to you, Beth.
All right. Can I have the clicker?
You surely can.
Thank you. So, once again, I'm Beth Flaherty. I'm the Director of Financial Aid here at Harvard Divinity School. And again, Julie Fields is my partner in crime over there. We have a two-person financial aid office. So if you end up coming to HDS, you'll get to know one or both of us very well by the time you're done here. Today, we're just going to talk about, we're going to sort of do an overview about talking about the process for financial aid, determining how we decide if you're eligible, what the cost of attendance is, so how much does it cost approximately to come to Divinity School here, the types of aid we have available. I'll give you a very small sample financial aid package. Then we'll talk about how do you fund what we're not giving you in financial aid, and we'll talk briefly about private scholarships. I do want to say that Angela and I both want to take questions at the end, so we'll certainly try to leave at least 10 minutes or so to do that. But in terms of the financial aid questions, I would recommend that if you have questions that are very, very specific to your situation, that you probably would want to not ask those here. Because those are things that we could talk to you about privately. Julie and I will both have office hours today from 4 to 5. We're over in Divinity Hall. Julie will actually scoot out a couple of minutes before the presentation is over so she can start seeing people at 4. But also, please feel free to call us, to email us. If you're going to be in the area tomorrow and would like to stop by, you can send us an email to make sure we'll be available, and we'd be happy to talk with you as well. And this is really a great opportunity in these next couple of months for you to ask all your questions. The only mistake that students really make is they don't ask a question and they make an assumption. And then all of a sudden, when the financial aid packages go out in March, they found out that their assumptions were completely out of whack, and now they're in a completely different place. And what I always say to students is, even if you think the question is stupid, ask it anyway, because even if it is stupid, we won't tell you. So just ask it. The biggest mistake you'll make is not asking a question. Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about the process for applying for financial aid. So if you are a domestic master's student applicant, meaning that you're a U.S. citizen or you're an eligible non-citizen, and you're applying to the MTS or the MDiv program, HTS offers both merit aid and need-based aid. So the difference between the two is that merit aid is decided on by the admissions committee. And I should say before I start, our admissions process is need blind. So no one in the admissions committee knows who's applying for financial aid. They don't have any sense of who has a lot of need, who has no need, who's applying, who's not applying. That never comes into the conversation in terms of how they make admissions decisions. Because oftentimes people will say, if I have a little bit of undergrad debt, will I not get accepted? And that never factors into the discussions. For the merit consideration, what happens is every student that applies for admissions is considered for merit aid. But that's a very small portion of the funds that we have to give out. We do some merit aid, but it's generally less than 20% of what we have to offer. We're giving out merit packages to the incoming class. Merit aid does not require a financial aid application, and like I said, everyone is eligible to be considered. However, a small portion will get those awards. So we always say, hope for merit and prepare for need-based. So we recommend that every student apply for need-based aid. So if you are a domestic master's student, you will be applying for financial aid by filling out the HDS institutional application for financial aid and the FAFSA, which many of you are probably familiar with, the free application for federal student aid. The HGS application just collects a little bit additional information that the FAFSA doesn't collect. If there's one thing you take away from what I'm saying today, it's apply, 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 and apply on time. Our financial aid deadline is not a suggestion, it is a rule. So February 16th, 2018 is the deadline. Our application actually won't be available until sometime in mid-January. And what we do is, once you've all submitted your applications for admission, we take that information, put it into our financial aid system, and then we send you email instructions on how to apply for financial aid. I will tell you, for reasons we can never quite figure out, every once in a while, our emails go to someone's spam. So be checking your spam all the time. But if it's getting to end of January and you haven't received anything about applying for financial aid, you should be in touch with us. Because what you don't want to do is just wait and assume it's going to be coming. So our deadline is February 16th, and again, that's a hard deadline. We don't have a time cutoff. You can have till midnight. Actually, you could probably complete it over the weekend and be none the wiser when we come in Monday morning. But just make sure that you hit that deadline. And again, sometimes students say, I'll apply for admissions first and then I'll worry about financial aid later and apply then. don't wait until then, because oftentimes what happens is once we've distributed all the aid we have to give, there's no more money to redistribute. So you will go on a wait list for funding, and quite honestly, in the past few years, we haven't been able to go to wait lists for funding for people that didn't meet the deadline. So make sure you apply on time. If you're a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen, you're again filling out the FAFSA, and you're filling out the FAFSA using your 2016 taxes. With this academic year, the FAFSA is now asking for tax information for 2 years prior. And I know some of you will be super excited because maybe you didn't have a lot of income in 2016, and some of you will be worried. So what we would always say to you is if you have a question or concern, be in contact with us. But we also would say if your financial situation is very, very different than what your tax information is showing, then we would recommend that you send us a separate letter, and you can do this through email after you apply for financial aid, and tell us exactly what the circumstances are, because we do take things like that into consideration. And if we find that we need more documentation from you, we'll ask you for that during the process. If you are, another important part about filling out the FAFSA, this one I can't really stress enough. Harvard University is a big university, but if you use the Harvard generic code, your FAFSA is going to FAFSA jail, and we'll never see it. Because what happens is it'll go to the college and they get hundreds of thousands of FAFSAs, and so we won't see that information. So when you fill it out, you want to make sure you're using the Harvard Divinity School code of E00210. And again, this information is on our website, and it will be in any correspondence that we send you about applying for financial aid. We don't require students to send us tax information. In fact, please don't send it unless we ask for it, but there is a possibility that you could be selected for a random process called verification, where we'll ask for your 2016 taxes and W-2s. And so it's always a good idea to know where that information is in case we should ask for it. In some cases, there may be additional information that we ask for. Perhaps you're a naturalized citizen, or you changed your name, but you haven't updated your name through Social Security. Sometimes we might have to ask for either a U.S. passport or naturalization certificate copy. So there could be additional things that we ask for, but we'll be very clear about that in the correspondence that we send out. If you are an international student, meaning you are not a U.S. citizen or eligible non-citizen, you are still absolutely eligible for financial aid, for institutional grant aid. The deadline is still the same. The only difference is that you cannot fill out the FAFSA, you just fill out the HDS institutional application. For those of you that might be considering the THM program, that is the one master's program that we do not fund with institutional grant aid. If you're a U.S. citizen or an eligible non-citizen, you can fill out a FAFSA, and you could be eligible for federal loans and or federal work study if you have eligibility, but we don't do any grant aid for that program, and we don't make any exceptions to that rule. Okay. So, a big question that we often get is, what does it cost to come to graduate school? So we are mandated by the Department of Education that we have to come up with what we think is a pretty realistic estimate of what it will cost a student to attend Harvard Divinity School. So this is our 2017-18 cost of attendance, because we haven't finalized it for next year yet. But the total cost of attendance is $54,716. Now, before you panic, that is not tuition, that's kind of everything together. And I'll break it down for you in a minute, sort of showing you the breakouts. But that for us is a 9-month cost of attendance, because HDS enrolls essentially September through May. We do have the summer language program that we do in the summer, but that's not an official period of enrollment for us. And actually the cost of those classes, other than there's a registration fee and there's like a $350 program fee. Those fees have to be paid out of pocket, but the actual tuition is part of your fall full-time tuition. So we can't certify student loans, we don't give grants over the summer, and we can't certify private loans. So the summer is really where students have to sort of figure out how they're going to cover those costs. The only aid we offer in the summer is work study when it's available. So this cost of attendance means this is what we think is a pretty good estimate of what it will cost you to attend for an academic year. And so then we're subtracting out what we're calling your EFC. So that's an estimated family contribution. So if you're filling out a FAFSA, the FAFSA will sort of spit out at you what your EFC is. But we also come up with an institutional calculation as well that considers some information that's not on the FAFSA or not counted in the same way that the FAFSA does. And that's how we determine if you have need-based eligibility. So we would take your cost of attendance, subtract out the EFC, and that is how we determine what your financial need is. And so here, this is someone that has a $12,500 EFC, and so they have need for $42,216. Now, one thing that I should say is, just because you see a 0 EFC does not mean that everything gets covered. We don't, unfortunately, have a situation where we can cover an entire cost of attendance with grant aid. And I'll talk a little bit more about what our grant ranges are. But it's good to start thinking now about what is your plan for graduate school? Because oftentimes I talk to students and they start formulating the plan about a week before they start the graduate school program, which is a little too late to start planning. And sometimes my favorite is when a student will say to me, well, God will provide. And I say, well, I hope that that happens, but it likely won't be on your time frame, and God wants you to have a backup plan. So you should really start thinking about what is the plan. And I'm one of those people, I like to hope for the best and plan for the worst. So I always think about plan for what you think the minimum grant you would get is, and then if you end up getting a higher grant, then that just makes the process much easier for you in terms of planning. But now is really a great time for you to start having very serious conversations about how you feel about debt. How much undergraduate debt do you have? What is your threshold for debt? A lot of students have never had that conversation, and this is a good time to have that. It really runs a gamut. I have some students that think $3,000 in loans is like the gross national product of a small country, and other people that come in with $100,000 and are not so concerned about that. I can't tell you how much is too much for you. But this is a really great opportunity for you to take that time and sort of figure out, how am I with money? Do I see being able to take anything that I have and use this towards my graduate education? Am I going to rely solely on student loans? And if I am, how comfortable I am with that? And we want you to use this as a resource. So if you want to call us and say, hey, how would I figure out if I were going to borrow X amount of student loans, how would I figure out what does that look like for repayments? We're happy to walk you through this. And even as applicants, we're happy to do that. So don't feel like you can't come to us for this information, because what we want you to do is, it's not our job to talk you in or out of taking loans, but we do want you to have the tools you need to make the best decision that you can, because what we don't want is someone that spent 2 to 3 years getting this great degree and then walks out and says, I can't afford to go into this field because I didn't think about how much debt I was taking on. So this is a good opportunity for you to really think through those questions. So let's talk about the happy part of the aid that we give, which is the grant aid. So grant aid is gift aid. It does not have to be repaid. And so the good news is 90% of our students are getting some sort of institutional grant. As I mentioned, the large majority of our funds are given out through the need-based program. And the need-based program has 3 tiers of grant levels. So 50%, 75% of tuition, and 100% of tuition. The next question is always, tell me which one I'm going to get. And the answer is I can't tell you that, because there's a lot of information that we have to go through. And Julie and I spend a lot of time going through each student individually and determining the eligibility. But like I always say, for planning purposes, go ahead and think 50%, and then if we come back to you with 100%, then it's obviously much better in terms of figuring things out. For those who are given those merit components, the merit is a full tuition scholarship plus a small stipend to help with living expenses, and the stipends typically run between $8,000 and $10,000. Both merit and need-based awards are renewable for the length of your program. The merits are contingent on you staying in the same program that you were originally admitted into, making satisfactory academic progress. They don't require you to apply for financial aid, although if you want student loans, you do have to still fill out a FAFSA. and if you're interested in work-study. For the need-based, you have to reapply for financial aid the next year by the same date, whatever date we give you, and then you also have to demonstrate need. Typically, students do not have less need in their second and third years than they did in the first. So while we don't increase the grant aid, there have been very few situations where we've ever reduced someone. I've been here almost 12 years. I can think of 3 situations where we reduced a student's grant, and in all 3, it was a case of marriage with incredible assets that they hadn't had before, and they actually were not so upset about that. But I say that because anytime you mention, your grant could get cut, people start to panic. We're not a bait and switch school. What we want to do is tell you what you can expect realistically, let you know that there's certainly a small chance if your situation changes very drastically in the positive that the grant could change, but typically it doesn't. The hard part is, even though you might have more need in your second or third year, we don't have the means to go back and reassess and increase grants. So whatever you get in your first year is typically what you're going to get in years 2 and 3. The only difference is we'll adjust it by whatever tuition is. So tuition goes up every year, so we'll adjust your half tuition grant by whatever half of the current year tuition is. So that just gives you a basic idea. Another thing about the merit component is Julie and I have need-based financial aid hearts, which means that in a perfect world, we give it all out based on need. But the reality is that a lot of our peer institutions are not doing need-based aid. They're just doing merit-based aid. So we know that in order to be competitive, we have to have a merit program, and we have a small one, and we're comfortable with that. But the hard part of that is that there's a very thin line between who gets a merit and who doesn't. The real truth is the large majority of our students could qualify for merit-based aid. We're just not giving out that much. So what we don't want you to do is, if you get a letter that says you're getting a 50% tuition grant, please do not take that as an indication that you're not worthy of being here, that we don't want you here, that you wouldn't contribute beautifully to our school. Because that's oftentimes what students take away from it. And the truth is if you get into Harvard, you're a great student, bottom line. So don't take that I didn't get a merit as somehow we don't recognize who you are and appreciate who you are. We still want you to come, otherwise we wouldn't send you that acceptance letter. Another popular question I get is, how do I write an application that will get me a merit award? And the truth is if I knew that, I would make a lot of money, because I would sell you the secrets. But the truth is, there is no formula. Students often want Julie and I to say, get this type of letter of recommendation, write this sort of statement, get this score on your GRE, have this GPA. And the truth is that students with 4.0s get rejected, and students with lower GPAs get accepted. It's all about how you present yourself. And a lot of this is about your personal statements, which Angela touched on being very important, and also your letters of recommendation. And oftentimes, students will say, I'm going to get my university president to write me a letter. But if his only experience with you is singing in the concert choir, he can say you have a beautiful soprano and you're a lovely person, but he can't really talk to who you are as a person and what you can bring to HTS. So choosing people that know you well is really important, and that's part of what might call your attention to the admissions committee in terms of the merit. Let's see. So this is just a breakdown of our budget for the cost of attendance. And again, I'm giving you 2017-18. The cost of attendance goes up every year. Tuition generally goes up between 2 and 3%. And the overall budget goes up maybe between 2 and 3% as well, sometimes a little bit more. So the tuition, by the time you're admitted, we know for sure what your tuition will be. The Blue Cross Blue Shield and the University Health Services, those are the 2 mandatory health insurances. The Blue Cross Blue Shield can be waived if you have your own insurance or you're covered under another plan. So a lot of students who are 26 or under can still be covered under their parents' plan. As long as you can show documentation of that, you can waive that. Excuse me, and we reduce that from your cost of attendance. The University Health Services fee, that's the fee that you pay to go to see someone in health services if you get sick, that's not waivable. So all students have to accept that. The activities fee is $70 for the academic year. All of that money goes directly to support student activities, and that's used solely for that. And then our food, our housing, our books, and our miscellaneous is basically an assumption of what we think it will cost to live in this area over 9 months. You'll see it's really a bare bones budget. The Department of Education doesn't give us a lot of leeway. There are a couple of areas where we can increase the cost of attendance. When we increase the cost of attendance, we're typically giving you a little more eligibility to borrow loans. We're not giving you more grants. But in some cases, we are also giving you work study eligibility in a case where you might not have had enough eligibility, and now we can increase you for other costs. It might free up some work study. The areas that we can increase for are housing, dependent care costs. So if you have dependent children and you're in school and your spouse is working full-time or your spouse is in school full-time, we could talk about increasing your costs to allow for some of those expenses. We do one-time increases for moving expenses, so oftentimes you're coming from other parts of the country and moving is not inexpensive. So if you bring us copies of those paid receipts, we can use that to increase your cost of attendance. And again, that's moving what you have from where you were to where you are. It's not buying all new stuff and furnishing a great apartment. It's renting a U-Haul and packing boxes and packing tape and things like that. If you're driving across country and you have to stay a couple of nights at a hotel, you can bring us hotel receipts, food receipts, gas receipts. If you're flying instead of moving, then we can take an airplane receipt. And then if you're going to ship your things, just bring us in copies of those paid shipping costs. And that's, again, only if you need it to increase your ability to borrow. And we can do some increases for out-of-pocket medical expenses, not covered by insurance. So say you're on costly medication, we could look at 1 month's worth of receipts and multiply that by the 9 months that you're in school. Oftentimes we do this for dental expenses or for students that have significant medical expenses or therapy that's not covered by insurance, so things like that. But we can't include things like discretionary expenses. So your car payment, your credit card payments, those are not things that we can fit into the budget. So when you're figuring out what it's going to cost you to come here, know that that's an estimate. And some students can come here for less than that, and some students come for a lot more. And a lot of that will depend on what you do with housing. If you have never priced out what housing is in the Boston area, this would be a good time to do it. Maybe wait until after you submit your application, because maybe you'll change your mind. But it's interesting because, we find that we have students that come from some parts of the country where you can rent a 3-bedroom house for $500 a month and you can't get a closet here. So you just have to be smart in terms of figuring out what a realistic budget is. I recommend looking at online sites to just get a sense as to what apartments are. We always recommend looking outside of Cambridge itself, although we do have some students that get great deals in Cambridge. But a lot of our students live in Somerville, and we're just a couple blocks over from Somerville, and it can often be less expensive. Watertown, sometimes Arlington. We do have students that choose to rent from Harvard, so HDS doesn't have any of its own housing. We don't have dormitories or apartments that we own. The Center for the Study of World Religion does have apartments, but they're more of an intentional community. You have to apply to live in their housing, but it's not discounted, although it's very convenient. You can also rent from Harvard, so Harvard serves as your landlord, but we find that what they charge is much more than the going rate, so it's not unusual to see a studio for $1,700 a month. We recommend, if you haven't thought about living with a roommate, start thinking about that option, because that will save you a lot of money. In some cases, it's not possible. There may be a certain situation where you can't have a roommate, and that's okay, but you just need to understand that your costs will be higher. And while we can increase a little bit for a cost of attendance, we're basically figuring out that your rent and utilities are going to be about $1,200 a month. So for a single student, we would probably bump you up to about $1,400 a month. For someone coming with a family, probably more like $1,900 a month. But if you're choosing to pay $2,000 for an apartment as a single person, we're not going to increase your cost of attendance for that because we feel like that's a choice. And what we don't want to do is encourage students to overborrow. I'm going to try to get through the rest of this quickly so that we have a little bit of time for questions. But the types of aid, we talked about that HGS grant. We also are participating in the direct federal unsubsidized Stafford loan program. So the federal Stafford loan program is for U.S. citizens and eligible non-citizens. And this allows you to borrow lower cost student loans that are guaranteed. And what that means is the only reason you can be denied for these loans is if you're currently in default of a previous student loan. And I should mention, HGS has a policy that if students are in default of a previous student loan, they're not eligible for institutional grant aid and or federal loans or work study. If you know that you have a default or you suspect you might have a default, or you have no idea if you might have a default, we would recommend that you look at a website called nslds.ed.gov, which is the National Student Loan Data System. You can create an account. You can see all of your federal loans there from any institutions that you have attended before. And it's really great at showing you who your servicer is and how much you've borrowed. And that's also a very useful tool when you're having your conversation with yourself about your borrowing threshold, because sometimes students don't actually know how much they borrow. So it's a good opportunity to sort of see how much you borrowed to date. And those loans are guaranteed, so unless you have a default, you can't be denied for them, so they're not based on your credit. If you needed loans on top of the Stafford, then you would have to look at something called a Graduate Plus loan, which is a credit-based loan that requires a credit check. It's a fairly lenient credit check, so it doesn't look at debt-to-income ratios, but it does look at 90 days adverse credit, bankruptcies, charge-offs, and liens. So if those are issues, that could keep you from getting that loan. There are some students that prefer to borrow a private loan, and you certainly could do that. We just recommend that you do your due diligence and find out exactly what the repayment options are. A lot of the private loans are based on a 10-year repayment, where the federal loans, direct and the graduate direct and the unsubsidized, can be based on a number of different repayment options. 10 years would be the minimum, and that would be the least amount of interest you pay over the length of time. But they have extended programs, they have graduated programs, they have income-based programs. So sometimes those repayment options are a little bit more favorable. But sometimes if your credit is great, you could get a better interest rate. You just need to be sure what does this all mean and how much time do you have to repay. Traditionally, we found that students that go the private loan, typically they don't have a lot of options. If they get into financial hardship a couple years down the road, there are no different repayment options in terms of extending for a longer period of time, so just keep that in mind. We also participate in the federal work study program. I would say probably more than half of our students are participating in federal work study, and that works out particularly well for students in the MDiv program who are doing field education placements, because a large majority of those are covered by work study. Not all of them, because of the separation of church and state, so there are some that are not covered by work study, but in those cases the Office of Ministry Studies generally has some of their own funds to assist students to be paid for those. The maximum is $5,000 for the academic year, because we only get a certain allotment of work study from the university, and we want to make sure that we're making it available to as many students as possible. So $5,000 doesn't seem like a lot of money, but I always think any amount of money that you can use to work and not have to rely on loans for that is positive. So again, this would just be a sample idea of what a financial aid letter would look like. We would, when we send out your awards, it's generally within 24 hours of your admissions decision going out. And so anyone that met the deadline and qualifies for need-based aid or merit-based aid would receive an email from us saying, go check your financial aid package online. So this is an example of someone that's getting a 3/4 or 75% tuition grant, and then we pre-package $8,500 of unsubsidized Stafford loans for students that have filled out a FAFSA. You can borrow up to $20,500 in the Stafford loan program, We don't pre-package all of your loan eligibility because we want you to really sit down and think about what you're going to need. We don't want to encourage students to overborrow. You certainly have that additional eligibility, and we'll send you information over the summer, but we generally wait until July to send you that information once the first bill goes out, because by then many of you have figured out what your housing's going to be. So don't panic. If you only see $8,500, don't make the assumption that's all you can borrow for loans, but that's sort of the starting point. And then that's a good opportunity for you to call us and have a conversation about how much more might I need to borrow. And then work study, we don't pre-package work study either, because we want to give it to students that actually intend to work. So you request work study once you get to campus, but once you're in the process, once you've been accepted, certainly call us up and say, can you tell me if I have eligibility for work study? Because then you can have a sense as to whether or not that would be likely in your case. And like I said, the large majority of students are eligible for work study. Okay, so we've talked about this a little bit, just thinking about how are you going to cover the rest of this and what's your plan going forward. If you haven't ever applied for private scholarships, I would certainly recommend that you do that. For those of you that are in the MDiv program, you might want to look at something called the Fund for Theological Education, and their address is fteleaders.org. They have not only some of their own scholarships and fellowships, but they also have something called the Fund Finder, where you can put in basic demographic information about yourself, and it'll pop up scholarships that you might be eligible for. They're largely based on religious affiliation, so if you're a Buddhist, you're probably not going to find so much there, but if you're Lutheran, might be okay, but it's worth looking. We also recommend that you do a Google search and that you look for private scholarships and cast a very wide net, because we had one student that would just, it seemed like every couple of weeks he would come in with a check for $500 and then a check for $250, and before you knew it, he had a couple of $1,000 in private scholarships. Our policy at HDS is typically, we try not to reduce your institutional grant aid based on outside scholarships, but we can't promise that won't ever happen. What we would try to do first is reduce any loans that you're borrowing, work study. The last thing we try to touch is your institutional grant support, because we don't want to penalize you for having the initiative. But if you come into me with a $30,000 private scholarship, I can't promise that because we have to keep you under your cost of attendance. So it's possible that it could be reduced, but if you're in that situation, call us and we'll talk you through what the process would be. We have a site on our website for outside funding. It's a very small smattering of what we know is available, but we recommend that you look at it. I will say it's largely for U.S. citizens or non-citizens, but there are certainly, once in a while, there's some postings that international students could apply for as well. And then quickly, Julie and I have office hours from 4 to 5 today over in Divinity Hall. Our email is on the website. We are happy to take questions. Give us a call, send us an email. Throughout this whole process, we're happy to walk you through and give you our advice. And we have about 5 or 6 minutes for questions. And Antoine is gonna. Okay.
Oh, if you would, the microphone is picking up for the streaming, people who are streaming.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
How many applications do you typically get for the programs?
Last year, last year, no, I don't have one. Last year we got approximately 440 applications. On average, in years prior, it was about 400. Mm-hmm.
For the merit-based aid, are those, or is that, I guess, money divided amongst all the different programs, or does that money go towards, I guess, some programs more than others oftentimes?
Yeah, it's really, there isn't an even split, and it varies from year to year. Some years, I would say it actually ends up being very close. If it's not a 50-50 split, it tends to be fairly close, but there are some years where it's a little higher on the MDiv side, and other years it's a little higher on the MTS. It really depends on the makeup of the class. But we don't break down, your areas of focus within the MTS. We don't say we're going to give 3 to people who are doing, religion, science, and culture, or something like that.
Hi, thank you for this information. I'm wondering about sending GRE scores and if it's necessary to specify the Divinity School or if we can just send generally to Harvard and they'll be...
Definitely specify the Divinity School. And all of our information is also on the website as well. Once you create, so some of it is on the public-facing part of the website, but that type of information you'll find once you've created your online application. There's really comprehensive instructions. And I believe even the code for GRE is probably on the public-facing side, so you can take care of that in advance. But if you have any questions about that, definitely get in touch with us.
I had a question about the summer language program. I think you mentioned it briefly, and I may have missed it, but did you say that there's no aid during the summer language program, or would it be that the package we get for the 9 months also covers?
Yeah, it doesn't cover summer, so you have to figure out how you're going to cover your housing and all of that for the summer. What it doesn't cover, there is a $50 registration fee for summer language and a $350 program fee. Those have to be paid out of pocket, but the actual tuition gets wrapped into your fall cost of attendance. So you're not into your fall tuition, and whatever percentage of grant aid you have goes towards covering that. But living expenses and how you're going to support yourself, that largely will have to come from you because we don't give out grant aid to help with housing in the summer, and we can't certify loans in the summer because it's not an official period of enrollment.
I have a question about financial aid. So is the estimated family contribution, would that be based on the individual who's applying, or if we still live at home with our family, is that a family, like our parents' assets, all of that?
That's a great question, and I'm glad you brought that up because I forgot to mention that. So as graduate students, you are considered independent. So that means we look at just your financial situation. And we only include people in your household, so it's you and anyone that you provide more than 50% of their support. So in most cases, it'll just be you. But if you were married and had a spouse or dependent children, you would include them in the household size as well. We don't look at your parent information. On the flip side, if your parents have a financial downturn, we can't take that into consideration because we never looked at their information to begin with. And I think you'll find that true of most divinity schools and most graduate schools, with the exception of medical schools and law schools, who typically look at parental information. But at HGS, for our purposes, we don't look at their income. We would just look at your income and assets. Yes.
Hi. Did you mention, do you cover 100% of need once it's established, or what's the average percent of need?
Yeah, we don't cover 100% of need because you could have, based on the cost of attendance, you could have $54,000 worth of need, and we don't have enough grant aid to do that. So if you're receiving aid from the need-based program, the most you would get is 100% tuition. But you would still have eligibility for work study, and then again, eligibility for student loans as well. And I think what's important also is when you're applying to other schools, you want to ask that question, but you also want to ask the question about how much of this grant can I count on for the length of my program? Should I expect the same level of grant, or do I get reevaluated completely different year after year? Or in some cases, I don't think this happens a lot, but occasionally they'll offer you something in the first year, and students might not see the fine print that says this is year one only and doesn't carry forward. So you want to make sure that you really understand your packages when you're making your decisions.
Hi, my name is Ruth, and I believe you mentioned earlier that you guys have a graduate assistant program here, and I was just wondering how that incorporates with helping to cover your financial needs here.
The graduate, I'm sorry, I didn't hear. Graduate
assistant? So yeah. We do, those are usually work study positions. So there are some students that use work study to do field education placements, but a large majority of our students are working anywhere throughout the university as graduate assistants, as library assistants. But those are usually work study funded positions for the most part, with a $5,000 allocation. There are some offices that you do your work study up until you hit the 5,000, and then they can switch you to regular payroll and pay you 100% out of their own. But a lot of positions can only pay you through work study funds. So in some cases that might work out, and others it might, you might have to stop working when you get to the 5,000. But not just through HCS, but through Harvard in general, there's tons of work study positions, and I've never had a student that came to me and said, I want a work study job, that couldn't find one as long as you're open to possibilities. If you have a very narrow idea of what you want to do, that will be a little harder, but if you're open, then the sky can be the limit.
I can also recommend, like, you all could also, email through the Ask Students to, if you, or just while you're still here, talk to some students, and, people have different ways. Not saying we're recommending any particular way of working, but some students also find part-time work in the area nearby. We don't recommend you work too many hours, but there's lots of ways. And some students that are here for longer also end up maybe having live-in positions in some of the housing, or just finding different ways to reduce some of their overhead. So that's another way that you can think about it, not just the financial aid award itself, but other means of you either managing your budget or finding other sources of income as well. I just want to say something really quickly, though. It's very hard when you're applying not to already be thinking about financial aid, and you should. But when it comes to the merit awards particularly, I find that people really focus on that, and I completely understand why, because it comes with full tuition and a stipend. But it could actually make you think about applying towards getting a merit award. And I really feel like you should be applying, putting your best foot forward as a potential student, and let the rest take care of itself, because really you're in the best position for everything if you do that, versus I'm going to put together a merit award application.
Yeah, because oftentimes the committee looks at that and goes, oh, I see what they're doing.
Yeah, I mean, you really, and if you want to talk further about this more one-on-one with us, please do, but I just want to caution you against that. I think everything Beth said is absolutely right about need-based aid, but when it comes to merit awards, please don't obsess about that. Really, at the end of the day, once you apply, if you get in, you have decisions to make. You'll know what award you got, whether it was merit, whether it was need. You might have met some students that say, I have a great apartment, come live with me and my roommates, it's gonna be great, your rent's not that bad. There's lots of decisions you'll have to make, but that's better for later than to front load your application with a worry about how it looks for potential merit award selection.
All right, I think we've used up our time.
Yeah.
So thanks so much. And again, both of our offices are having open office hours, so come and see us if you have questions.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for your time.